Does it really make any sense to use these old Mac Pros still today? Welcome to the second part of my video series, Does it really make any sense? In the first part, I talked about vintage Macs. By the way, if you missed that, I strongly recommend you subscribe my channel and click the bell for notifications so you don't miss another part. All about vintage Macs, for instance, the iMac 2002, still with a PowerPC chip, not an Intel one, all up until 2011. So why did I stop in 2011? Because after my findings, Mac models from 2012 and younger, like this MacBook Pro 2012 here, are still quite capable of running the latest macOS Sonoma also as a daily driver. I don't recommend that for 2011 and older. There are too many problems and too much unsupported hardware. And in 2012, Apple also released the last version of the MacPro cheese grater. 1 year later, in 2013, they released the MacPro trash can. And so I decided to make a dedicated video about those two Mac Pros. Why? Because a lot of you are still using those Mac Pros also as a daily driver, and that creates a question, does that really make any sense in 2024? And to answer that question, I have some topics in this video. First, obviously, performance. How fast are these old Mac Pros compared to what? And so I needed another Mac to compare them to. But that should be reasonable, because if you compare those Mac Pros to the 2019 Mac Pro, the refresh of the cheese grater, that would be unfair, correct? So there's another reason why so many of you are still using those old Mac Pros. It's the price tag, because the refresh from 2019 still starts in the base config of eBay around $1,500. This one here is around $300. The Mac Pro 2013 is only $200. So if you're thinking maybe I buy this one, upgrade the graphics card, add a little bit of storage, and you may end up around $400 to $500. And so I had a look, what Mac could I choose to compare the performance that is around $400 to $500. There it is. The Mac Mini 2020 Apple Silicon M1 base config, 8 GB of memory. And so it's quite comparable as this one, same as the Mac Pros, also need a separate monitor, separate keyboard, separate mouse, and has around the same price tag of eBay. But another reason why a lot of you are still using the Mac Pros is expandability. You cannot change anything on the hardware with the newer Macs, same with the MacBooks or with the iMacs, but with the old Mac Pros, obviously you can add some more storage, you can swap the CPUs for the highest CPU available. This one you can swap from a single CPU to a dual CPU tray, you can add memory, and so on. But as a teaser, that's the second part of the video, it's not always the fastest solution to put as much memory into the Mac Pro as possible. So we talk a little bit about useful memory configurations, which may also save you some money. Third part, expandability. You can spend a fortune inserting a quad RAID NVMe card into that Mac. Okay, that's like $2,000 of very fast storage. Let's keep it reasonable and cheap and simple in this video. Okay, for instance, this Mac Pro here doesn't have USB 3.0. You can have a very cheap USB 3.0 expansion card, 7 ports, whereas 2 of the ports have already USB-C of USB 3.0. And obviously you can swap the spinning hard disks. Maybe if you use such a plastic, against an SSD, yeah, and then you can, later in the video I show you all that, you can have an adapter card to put that SSD into the PCI Express slots, because up here it's only SATA 2, only 300 megabytes per second. This one is PCI Express, it's faster, and I show you a very reasonable procedure how to plug an NVMe into that Mac Pro with an adapter card and the NVMe drive. It's maybe around $50, where you can upgrade your Mac Pro, and I show you all the benchmarks, how much faster it gets from the SSD to the NVMe. And the last topic obviously is power consumption. Okay, Apple always advertises their Apple Silicon chips as very less power consuming, and so let's see if you put it in full working stage, how much does the Mac Mini uses compared to the Mac Pro 2012, compared to the Mac Pro 2013, and that all together should give you an answer to the question, does this really make any sense in 2024, or maybe you should go with a new hardware. Let's go. First topic, performance. But before we dive into the benchmarks, let's talk about the hardware setup that I used. There was an official statement by Apple that if you upgrade your Mac Pro cheese grater to a metal capable graphic card, it was officially supported up until macOS Mojave instead of macOS High Sierra. And the fastest officially supported and recommended graphics card by Apple for that Mac Pro was the Sapphire Radeon RX580 with 8 GB of RAM. So that is a regular PC graphics card. It's not flashed, nothing, just a regular PC graphics card that you can plug into the Mac Pro and officially install macOS Mojave. And that is the card that I still use in my Mac Pro. Why? There are some things you have to consider when you put a faster graphics card into your Mac Pro. The power supply has around 1,000 watts, so that's no problem, but the power supply for the graphics card runs through the main backplate. There are two mini connectors, Apple proprietary, that you can get some adapter cables, and I have a cable here that is the two mini connectors to one 8-pin connector that goes into the Radeon RX580. If you use a card that draws more power, the power supply can deliver the power, but the backplate, the main board, cannot. There is a mod that's called the Pixlas Mod, where you use the power supply cable to the main board and you just get the power directly off that supply cable and not via the main backplate, via the main board, and then you can power a newer graphics card that need more power. The highest and newest graphics card that you can put into here, in my opinion, is the AMD Radeon Vega 56. The Vega 64 has too much power draw. The Vega 56 is capable of running through that mainboard power supply. I had it once that it shut off instantly. I don't know if that was because of the power draw. But, there's always a but, if you use the Vega 56, I had a lot of trouble running the AMD Vega in Sonoma. So the most stable macOS with the AMD Radeon Vega, in my opinion, is still Monterey. With the RX580, no problems with macOS Sonoma. There's one more thing, as Apple always says, if you have that Sapphire Radeon RX580. Here in the back, there might be a tiny switch that has to be in game mode. The other setting is like a power saving mode, that you can use if you use that card for mining or for I don't know what. But if you have this in power saving mode, you won't see a boot screen and nothing. It will stay black. So make sure that this tiny switch here is to the side of the PCI Express connector in game mode. That's a graphics card. For the MacPro 2013, unfortunately, you cannot swap the internal graphics cards. There are only 3 cards, that is the D300, D500 and the D700 card that you can put into it. There are always 2 cards and they are quite expensive of eBay, and the D500 and the D700 are prone for mechanical failure due to thermal stress. So everyone in the forums, and I really recommend, if you are planning on getting a Mac Pro 2013, get one with a D300 that is not so prone for the error, and upgrade the CPU, because the D300 obviously was a base config, so you have the base config CPU. You can just simply upgrade the CPU to the 12-core CPU if you want to. And if you need more external graphics power, you can use an eGPU, an external GPU. But, there's always a but, Apple only allows eGPUs officially on Macs with Thunderbolt 3. The Mac Pro 2013 still has Thunderbolt 2. And so you need a little hack that also works with OpenCore, and I give you the link down in the video description. That's called Kryptonite, that enables eGPUs with Thunderbolt 2 in macOS, only up until Monterey. So macOS Monterey is the latest official macOS for that Mac Pro 2013. So unfortunately, you cannot go higher to Ventura or Sonoma if you're planning on using an eGPU. You're stuck with the official Monterey, but with the Kryptonite patch with OpenCore to enable eGPU. And so this Mac Pro is also running Sonoma 14.5, same as this Mac Pro 2012 here. And I did the benchmarks on both of them, as I said, with the RX580 in the Mac Pro 2012 and with the D300 graphics card in the Mac Pro 2013. That is a little unfair, as that graphics card here is from 2017 and metal capable. These are from 2013, not metal capable, but at least the memory and the CPU benchmarks are quite comparable. Both are 12-core CPUs. This one is a 12-core Xeon. This one is 2 times a 6-core Xeon. That's also max CPU. And so let's dive into the benchmarks, how those 2 Mac Pros compare against the Mac Mini M1. So let's talk about benchmarks. The first benchmark that I used was the Cinebench 2024. And the Cinebench only takes into account pure CPU power. And so when we look at the benchmark graphs, you can see that the single CPU score is increasing from 39 to 46 to 112 from Mac Pro 2012, 13 to the M1. Obviously, because the single cores, as newer as the CPU gets, are more efficient. But as you can see with a multi-core score, the MacPro 2012 is leading with 568. The MacPro 2013 is then following with 528, and the M1 is last with 519. How is that possible? The Mac Pros 2012 and 13 are 12-core CPU. And the M1 chip in the Mac Mini is only an 8-core CPU. So it's missing 4 cores against the Mac Pros, and not all of those cores in the M1 are power cores. There are some efficiency cores, so it has less cores to render the benchmark. And so you can see that the old 12-core Mac Pros in total have a higher result in the Cinebench than the M1 chip in the Mac Mini. So now let's check NovaBench. NovaBench takes the GPU also into account, and in the benchmark there's also memory and storage score, but I just omitted that for my benchmarks here. And with NovaBench the results are a little bit different. You can see that the MacPro 2012 has a CPU score of 811 and the MacPro 2013 has a CPU score of 756. That's the same situation as with the Cinebench, where the total multi-core score of the MacPro 2013 was a little less than the one of the 2012. But here NovaBench seems to use more newer CPU technology and new CPU features, so that the M1 chip with the 8 cores can lead the scoring with 842. So depending on what you are doing with your Mac, if it's raw processing power for rendering like Cinebench, or maybe some different tasks that use more advanced and newer features of the CPU, the M1 chip can beat those old Mac Pros, as it does here in the NovaBench. Obviously the GPU score is highest with the AMD Radeon RX580 with 314 against the Mac Pro 2013, which has the very old D300 non-metal graphics card, which obviously makes him last place with 115, and the M1 chip with an integrated graphics unit with 140 points in GPU score. That's obvious, and that was what I expected, because the Radeon RX580 is a full-blown graphics card that can itself already draw 185 watts. Just a teaser, that's more than 3 times the amount of power the whole Mac Mini draws under full load. So obviously if you have a gaming graphics card with 2 fans, a lot of wattage, even though it's from 2017, this goes into lead. And so here is another use case. If you need a lot of graphics power, then maybe the Mac Pro 2012 or the Mac Pro 2013 with an eGPU on macOS Monterey, we already talked about that, is the better choice as a Mac Mini M1 chip with the integrated graphics unit. So the last benchmark is the Geekbench 6. I think a lot of you know that software. It's for Windows or for macOS, and Geekbench now splits up the scoring into single core, multi-core, and GPU in OpenCL and GPU in Metal score. So what does that mean? OpenCL is an API, an interface that you can use to program graphics. Metal also is a graphics interface, but from Apple. And obviously Apple has tuned its own Apple Silicon towards Metal and not towards OpenCL. And so if we look at the scores here, Geekbench seems to make use of some more advanced features of the CPU, same as NovaBench. And so you can see that the newer the CPU gets, the higher the single CPU score gets. Okay, the MacPro 2012 has only 606 points single core. The MacPro 2013 already has 726 points, as the M1 has 2401 points single core. That totals up to a multi-core score that also increases as newer as the CPU gets. So here the MacPro 2012 is last with 4564 points. Then the MacPro 2013 is there with 5189 points, and the M1 has a total score of 8784 points. That is nearly twice as fast as the MacPro 2012. Geekbench has optimized its benchmarks also towards Apple Silicon. So I'd like to give you all three benchmarks that you can have a understanding, or you can have an idea how fast those three Macs are compared to each other. Bottom line, if you use new software that uses new and advanced CPU features, and for instance one thing is AVX2 that is not implemented into the old CPUs of the Mac Pros, then if you use the new software, obviously the new Apple Silicon beats the old CPUs. GPU wise, here with the Geekbench 6, it's the same picture as before. The FirePro 300 graphic card is last in OpenCL and Metal, and as I said, Apple has tuned its Apple Silicon towards Metal, and so the M1 integrated CPU is more or less quite as fast in OpenCL than the old D300 from the MacPro 2013. Obviously the Radeon RX580 wins with its 185 watts, but it's very interesting that Apple could manage to nearly reach the same speed in Metal with the M1 integrated graphics unit than the RX580. And so bottom line, graphic wise, if you're using Metal applications, then an M1 or maybe M2, M3, Pro, Max, Ultra, whatever, is the better choice than a 7-year-old gaming graphics card that draws a lot of power. And last but not least, I tested the Unigine Valley benchmark. That is already from 2013. Why? On the one hand, it's the newest Unigine that you can get for macOS, and on the other hand, I needed a benchmark that technically can run on the old Mac Pros from 2012 and 13. Obviously, you see that the Mac Pro 2012 with the RX580 has the highest maximum frame rate and also the highest average frame rate with 28 frames per second. The Mac Pro 2013 is only able to have an average frames per second of 15, while the M1 has an average frame rate of 20 frames per second. That Unigine Valley has nothing to do with the Metal API, it's all OpenCL. And there is one interesting fact: the M1 chip manages to have the best minimum frame rate, because the minimum frame rate here is 12 frames per second, while even the Mac Pro 2012 with the RX580 sometimes drops down to 7 frames per second. And so obviously the M1 doesn't have the gaming performance in non-Metal applications as the RX580 in the Mac Pro 2012, but it doesn't drop that far down with a minimum frame rate. And I think this is quite a good comparison to the full-blown gaming graphics card in the Mac Pro 2012. Second part, memory speed. And to talk about the memory speed, we have to dive in a little bit into the technical details of the Mac Pro 2012 and 13. The Mac Pro 2012, the cheese grater, has 4 RAM slots per CPU. So if you have a dual tray, you have 8 slots. But Apple only used a triple channel memory controller in that Mac Pro 2012. So you say, okay, what's that? So basically, the fastest memory speeds are achieved if you enable triple channel by only inserting 3 or 6, if you have a dual CPU tray, memory modules into the Mac Pro 2012. The Mac Pro 2013 has 4 memory slots, but here Apple used a quad channel memory controller. So with the Mac Pro 2013, you are better off using 4 memory modules instead of like 2 or 3. And so let's check with the benchmarks how much difference that really make, and let's check and compare the memory speeds of the Mac Pro 2012 against the Mac Pro 2013. Because if you are using, or if you're planning to use applications that do a lot of memory interactions, that rely on fast system memory, and you want to choose between those 2 Mac Pros, you can see later in the benchmarks what would be the perfect Mac Pro for you. So here the Nova bench with the Mac Pro 2012, and you can see the triple channel, so that is 6 modules, each 8 GB, has a slight memory speed increase against 4 modules or 8 modules. Don't get confused about the blue memory score, because Nova bench here also takes into account the total amount of memory. So as we increase from 32 to 48 to 64 GB total memory, obviously the memory score goes up. And obviously, if you have applications that need as much memory as possible, you maybe go with a full 4 or 8 modules to have the maximum amount of memory and have a very little less speed in the Mac Pro 2012. Let's check the Mac Pro 2013. Here you can see that whenever you activate quad channel, that you have an increase of about 100 to 200 megabytes per second. Also here the blue bars increase as you increase the memory, but just ignore the total scoring. So let's compare Mac Pro 2012 against 13, and there you can see that the Mac Pro 2012 with a triple channel, 48 GB, against the Mac Pro fully set up with 64 GB, against the fully set up Mac Pro 2013 with 64 GB. But you can see that the Mac Pro 2013 has nearly twice as fast memory, because it uses 1800 MHz against 1300 MHz RAM modules. Let's go to the Geekbench. It changes a little bit, and so here you can see that the triple channel Mac Pro, the single core score remains more or less the same, but the multi-core score increases by around 200 points. Let's check the Mac Pro 2013 with the Geekbench scoring. Here you can see the same results if you're using quad channel, and even only if you have like 16 or 64 GB, single core score remains, but the multi-core score is higher than if you only would use the dual channel. Here the difference is already 300 to 400 points. So let's compare both On one slide, here you can see the triple channel MacPro 2012 is around 4,500, whereas the quad channel MacPro 2013 is around 5,200. Obviously, as the Geekbench uses some newer and advanced CPU features, we saw that before in the CPU scoring, the total score is a little higher when you have a newer CPU like the MacPro 2013. Next, I used two more memory benchmarks, and the first one is Passmark. And Passmark now can show the CPU score, the memory score, the read and the write megabytes per second, and the threaded speed. So what does that mean? Passmark checks how many cores your CPU has. In this case, 12 cores and 24 threads. And now Passmark uses 24 threads that require data from the memory, either read or write, and checks how much throughput it can create with a full threaded benchmark. And so you can see here that the triple channel MacPro 2012 has overall higher scoring than the dual channel memory configuration. The score is lower and the read speed is nearly the same, but the write speed is lower. Why is that? Because reading is more or less easy. It just says, okay, give me some data. Writing is a little bit more complex because the controller always has to look, okay, where are free spaces or where is old data that I can overwrite. So it always has to search for spaces where it can write some data. Sometimes the data doesn't fit in a row and you have to search for a new space to continue writing the data. So write speed is a little bit more complicated, and here you can see the triple channel increases the speed by around 1000 megabytes per second. That's a gigabyte per second faster write speed. Same memory modules. I just entered two more and fully loaded up the MacPro 2012. And especially you can see that memory difference when you see the threaded speed. The triple channel reaches 28 gigabytes per second throughput, whereas the dual channel only reaches 17,000 megabytes per second, or 17 gigabytes per second. That's an increase by more than 10 gigabytes per second in the benchmark, just by removing two memory modules and just putting 6 instead of 8 memory modules into the Mac Pro. Let's check the Mac Pro 2013. Here the difference is even greater. When you have a dual channel and you set it up as a quad channel, the CPU score increases, the read speed remains with around 12 gigabytes per second, but the write speed here increases by 1.5 gigabytes per second. And the threaded speed increases from 27 gigabytes to 53 gigabytes. That's double the speed. Obvious, because you increase from dual to quad channel. Let's just compare both on one slide. You can see the memory difference in speed, even though if you use a triple channel Mac Pro 2012 against the quad channel Mac Pro 2013 is huge. So let's go to the last benchmark, and that is the amorphous memory mark. The advantage of that benchmark is that you can see the difference between a one-threaded benchmark and a multi-threaded benchmark, a little bit like the Passmark where we had the threaded throughput. But here you can also see the difference between sequential read and write or random read and write. So what's the difference? Okay, sequential read is if you have a large file that you want to read from memory, and the controller can just start at one position and then go one after each other and just read the whole file at once. Or write the file. If he has enough space, he can just start and write the whole file one after each other. Random means that the controller always has to search. Okay, there's one piece of information here, one piece of information there, one is here, and so it has to read all over the place to have the full file read or write. That obviously takes longer. The first benchmark is with a MacPro 2012 triple against 2x dual channel, and there you can see that the benchmarks are more or less at the same speed. But that is only single threaded benchmark. What does that mean? Now the T1 means that only one thread is active. One thread that requests information from the memory or that wants to write information to the memory. So only one core is active. And the memory controller now can handle that one thread fast enough that it doesn't make any difference if you're using triple or dual channel. Let's see how that works with the MacPro 2013, and you can see that's nearly the same. Okay, single threaded read or write. If it's sequential or random, the memory controller can handle it. If we compare both Mac Pros against each other, you can see again the MacPro 2013 with the faster memory, and the quad channel controller is faster than the MacPro 2012. But now let's check the 8-threaded version of that benchmark. That is the MacPro 2012, and now 8 threads are requesting information from the memory or want to write information to the memory. And here you can see the sequential read with triple channel is 27.8, while it's in dual channel only 17.1. The sequential write goes down from 16 to 7 if you add one more memory stick, or 2 if you have a dual CPU version. The random read goes down from 23 to 14, and the random write goes down also like the sequential write from around 16 to 7. That's a large difference, and another hint that you might use the triple channel in a Mac Pro with maybe 48 gigabytes if you're not really dependent on 64 gigabytes. Let's switch to the Mac Pro 2013. Here the difference is way greater if you don't use the quad channel. So the sequential read goes up from 26.9 to 52.4. The sequential write goes up from 10 to 21. The random read goes from 24 to 45, and the random write from 10 also to 21. So a double the scoring if you fully use all 4 channels of the quad channel memory controller. So let's compare those two, and now you can see the real memory advantage of the Mac Pro 2013 again, because it's around double the speed, double the scoring than even the triple channel Mac Pro 2012. Third part, expandability. But unfortunately I got bad news. During filming of this video I realized that I will end up already around 45 minutes without that chapter. And so I decided to make 2 separate videos. Like, does it make sense part 2A about the Mac Pro 2012 and 2B about the Mac Pro 2013. So if you haven't yet, I would recommend you subscribe to the channel and click the bell for notifications so you don't miss these videos. And obviously you don't miss the third part that is about all other Macs from 2012 to 2017. Quick summary, what will be in that expansion videos? We talk about upgrading your spinning hard disk against an SSD. Obviously, that's the easiest part with just some plastic adapters. We talk about putting that SSD instead of the SATA slot into the PCI Express slot with an adapter card, $20, cheap upgrade, and you get all the benchmarks how much faster it will get. We will talk a little bit about the technical details about like 1 or 4 lane PCI Express 2.0 and the realistic speeds you can expect. And obviously the fastest upgrade will be an NVMe via an adapter card, PCI Express, that you can plug in here, and I show you how much faster it will get. Talking about the price, staying reasonable, this package here is around $60. And then we talk about USB 3.0. The Mac Pro 2012 doesn't have USB 3.0. There are some adapter cards that you can get. Also, we talk about 1 or 4 lane PCI Express, USB 3.0 or USB 3.1 Gen 2 or whatever, and what speeds you really can expect when you plug that card into the PCI Express slots. When we talk about the Mac Pro 2013, we talk about storage expansion. If you want to plug a larger storage NVMe into it, unfortunately you cannot just plug it in. You need an adapter card. We talk about that you can use regular NVMe into the Mac Pro 2013. I give you some resources, what NVMEs you can plug in there, because it doesn't work with all NVMEs, typically Apple. And next thing, talking about expandability, we talk about eGPU. And I give you a step-by-step tutorial, if you have a Mac Pro 2013, how to enable an external GPU via Thunderbolt 2 and how to configure your macOS Monterey that you can use external graphic cards like the AMD Vega or the RX580, so that you have the same graphics power than in the Mac Pro 2012. For the fourth part of that video, I have a quiz for you. Where do you think does this indication belong to? Correct. That is the Mac Pro 2012 in idle, including the monitor, mouse and keyboard. Second question, what do you think the Mac Pro 2012 will need, how much power it will need when you let a benchmark like the Unigine Valley run, where the graphics card starts drawing power? Let me show you. It is 450 watts. That is the fourth part. I'd like to talk about the power consumption of the 3 Macs. Let's switch to the Mac Pro 2013. The idle power with the monitor is only around 130 watts. And I just let the Valley benchmark run. With the internal D300 graphic card, the Mac Pro 2013 reaches around 250 watts of power consumption. But if you would add an eGPU with 185 watts RX580, that will go up maybe by another 100 watts. And now let's talk about the Mac Mini with the Apple M1. In idle, including the monitor, and I think the monitor is already around 20 to 25 watts, depending on your model. The Mac Mini only needs 42 watts. That's a huge difference. If we compare 42 to 240 watts, then this is 5 times the power consumption just for doing nothing. And if you start the Unigine Valley benchmark on the M1 Mac Mini, it makes a tremendous jump to 60 watts total, including monitor. 60 watts against 450 watts. Yes, the Mac Pro 2012 has a higher score in the Valley, so it has more performance. But the Mac Pro 2013, who has a lesser performance in the benchmark, also needs 250 watts. So I hope I could give you an overview about all the advantages and disadvantages of those two old Mac Pros. If you have any questions or comments, just drop me a comment below the video, or better, just join our Discord community. The link is down in the video description and is pinned as the first comment, and there are already around 2,300 members discussing everything about unsupported Macs. So that's a great community to join, and I would love to see you on Discord. Other than that, here on my channel there's a lot to explore. As promised, the expandability videos part 2a and 2b will be released soon. They are already in the making. Other than that, have a great day. See you soon. Bye bye.